Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a really complex, honestly fascinating transboundary waste emergency that's unfolding right now in the summer of 2026. We are looking at a massive geopolitical bottleneck that is rapidly closing in on the North American supply chain, and we're going to see exactly how a localized, cutting edge AI solution is essentially outsmarting a global trade war. Now, you really have to consider the sheer physical stakes of what we're talking about here. Ontario, Canada, currently ships 3.46 million tons of municipal solid waste, or MSW, into the state of Michigan for disposal every single year. I mean, try to visualize that. This is a massive, highly integrated logistical network shipping trash across the border to U.S. Michigan landfills from Ontario, Canada, and it's operated pretty much quietly for well over a decade. And to put that into perspective, you can see just how dependent this whole system actually is. According to recent year-to-date data from Michigan's environmental agency, Canadian garbage makes up a staggering 14.35% of all the waste disposed of in Michigan landfills. It is by far the single largest source of out-of-state waste they have, so you can see how deeply entwined these two regions are. But right now, this vital pressure release valve is freezing over. To understand how this happens and how we fix it, here is our agenda. First, the closing waste corridor. Second, the landfill capacity cliff. Third, the sentient bridge. Fourth, the digital refinery workflow. And fifth, the circular bioeconomy. All right, Section 1, the closing waste corridor, geopolitics at the border. If we map out the current year-to-date headline news trends, we see a really rapid escalation. Trade negotiations in Washington stall out, and sudden unilateral tariffs are deployed as immediate economic pressure. On July 1st, Washington declined to renew the USMCA, or SUSMA as it's known up in Canada, in its current form. Just weeks later, President Donald Trump signed executive orders under Section 338, slapping massive 50% tariffs on Canadian goods. And crucially, this put wood products right into the tariff basket. Literally the very next day, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed a budget drastically raising state tipping fees. So the takeaway here is that we are looking at two distinct walls closing the corridor at the exact same time. You've got a federal U.S. tariff wall in Washington imposing a 50% duty, and a state-level fee wall in Michigan hiking the cost to dump trash from 36 cents all the way up to $5 per ton. They are aggressively, actively pricing this transboundary waste corridor shut. Which brings us to Section 2, the landfill capacity cliff, Ontario's breaking point. For years, private industrial waste haulers, well, they just followed the math, right? They took advantage of Michigan's incredibly low 36-cent per ton dumping fee, especially when you compare it to neighboring states like Ohio sitting at almost $5 or Wisconsin way up at $13. It was just simply cheaper for businesses in Ontario to load construction debris onto a truck and drive it down Highway 401 across an international border than it was to dispose of it locally. But here's the catch. Because of this decades-long reliance on cheap American export, Ontario kind of dropped the ball. They completely failed to build out their own domestic capacity. This created a hard capacity cliff projected for 2034. Within a decade, Ontario will quite literally have nowhere to put its garbage. So cross-border export isn't just convenient anymore, it is an absolute necessity. This quote captures the impartial, raw mechanics of cause and effect so perfectly. Ontario is aggressively fast-tracking domestic landfill sites like the somewhat controversial Dresden dump via a new piece of legislation called Bill 5, and Premier Doug Ford explicitly stated that bypassing local environmental assessments to build this dump is a direct response to the very real fear of President Trump closing the U.S. border. It's a true, full-blown infrastructure emergency. Let's move on to Section 3, the sentient bridge, AI at the edge. This is where 905 Wood steps in, and it's brilliant. They realize that the border crisis isn't actually a waste problem at all. It's a classification problem. Think about it. If you can mathematically prove a truckload is clean, high-purity wood, it instantly stops being generic trash targeted by tariffs, and it becomes a highly sought-after biocarbon feedstock. So they built a 6-layer digital refinery, what they called the sentient bridge, to filter and classify this material right at the source. To actually pull this off, their Layer 1 compliance gate literally puts the AI on a chip right in the truck driver's hand. They're operationalizing a Google Pixel 10 Pro running the Android 16 operating system. By tapping into the Tensor G5 NPU and using a light RT AI runtime stack, they allow a Gemma-class edge model to visually classify a load of wood in under 500 milliseconds.
And that's completely offline, before the truck even moves. The intelligence isn't sitting in some distant data center, it's right there at the bin.
All right, Section 4, the 905 Wood Digital Refinery Workflow. Paperwork as a firewall. The digital refinery application features a highly structured UI/UX workflow that churns out perfect PDF documentation features. Let's break it down. Step 1, a request for quote, or RFQ, books the load. Step 2, the system auto-generates a specific certificate of origin. Step 3 is verification against provincial standards. And Step 4 is compliance, which securely seals the data. This entire 4-step pipeline ends in a heavily encrypted PDF that basically acts as a regulatory passport for the commodity. And this is the really amazing part. That specific paperwork, it actually acts as the firewall. Because the AI proved the wood is clean, Step 2 generates a USMCA-compliant certificate of origin. It legally classifies the load under the harmonized system, specifically HS Code 3825.0, as a residual feedstock. This specific classification argues the load is completely immune to the 50% Section 338 tariff wall, cleanly keeping the corridor open. Now, during the verification step, the system uses math to prove the wood is safe. It essentially ensures the load does not leach harmful heavy metals, things like arsenic, lead, or chromium, beyond the incredibly strict limits set by Ontario Regulation 347. This proves undeniably to both sides of the border that they are not dealing with hazardous waste. Then comes the compliance step, which freezes all these specific data points into an immutable ledger, locked in Vertex ML metadata. We're talking the exact AI model version, the precise GPS coordinates, a to-the-second timestamp, and a cryptographic hash. So when tariff auditors inevitably come knocking, they don't just get a nice story from a truck driver. They get a court-ready, mathematically signed chain of custody right there in a PDF.
Finally, Section 5, the circular bioeconomy, compliance as a commodity.
As one industry analyst put it so perfectly, 95 Wood isn't really a waste management company. Actually, under the North American Industry Classification System, NAICES Code 51, they are fundamentally an information company. Their true product isn't the wood itself. Their true product is absolute, undeniable proof.
This brings up a fascinating concept: explainable compliance. By radically raising the price of being non-compliant, these new federal tariffs and state fees actually skyrocket the value of what 905 Wood does. When the border gets tough, showing up with a mathematically verified passport for your cargo becomes incredibly lucrative.
And the downstream benefits, they just compound. Once that clean wood crosses the border tariff-free, it becomes a powerful carbon passport for construction debris. It secures clean rates for the haulers, generates carbon dividend tracking, unlocks cork or CO2 removal certificates, and it feeds straight into downstream pyrolysis to create biochar. By operationalizing this AI stack, the sentient bridge serves as the essential gateway between chaotic waste and the high purity requirements of the biocarbon market, securing Ontario's industrial leadership in the global circular bioeconomy. Which leaves us with a massive question to wrap up this explainer. It really makes you wonder, in an era of unpredictable global trade wars and constantly shifting border policies, is provable, edge-computed data now our single most valuable commodity? The side that can mathematically prove the purity of their resources might just be the side that completely dictates the future. Thanks for joining me to unpack this wild intersection of geopolitics, waste disposal, and edge AI. Keep asking questions, and as always, keep looking at the data.